Welcome to another episode of the Building Your Career podcast. Today, I'm joined by Faye Allen as we dive into women in construction. Faye's recently just published a book as well, so we'll have all the links below. But I thought this was a super important topic to cover and something that Faye is definitely passionate about, and I think something that does need to be at the forefront of everyone's mind as well in the construction industry. So, Faye, thank you very much for being a guest. Could you start off where we always start off and give a little bit of a overview of who you are, and then also go back to the beginning and how you got started in the industry?
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me. So, my name's Faye. I've been in the construction industry for 31, nearly 32 years now. I'm a chartered surveyor and I work in disputes in the industry now. So I've done 20 years of my career with various contractors working on all sorts of different projects. And then in the last sort of 10, 11 years, I went into consulting and now I work in sort of the dispute side. Very varied, shows how you can pivot your career as well. And I got into it because of my dad. It's all his fault. He was an estimator, took me out to the yard when I was little. And then when I was sort of not able to decide what I wanted to do, didn't want to finish my A-levels, he started taking me out on jobs with him. And it was an old Tudor building that was being renovated, said to be one of the ones that Henry VIII used to stop at when he was travelling around the country. And he sent me out with a tape measure and a drawing, and I went off and I was like, wow, this is actually quite cool, looking at what they were going to do to the building. And he was like, well, then, let's go and get you trained somewhere. So I joined Try Construction, as they were back then, at 18 years old, and I did 4 days working, 1 day release doing sort of college and then later university. So it solved me not wanting to be in full-time education and wanting to sort of earn some money. And also, you learn a lot when you're doing that. So it's been a long time, but I do think the industry's got a lot to offer.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of people on this podcast, it's kind of family connections within the industry that got them in there first. And I suppose, what I'm trying to do with the podcast is just highlight the different avenues that people can go down within the construction industry, and not just, see it as there's just one type of job within the construction industry. There's lots of different avenues and paths that you can go down. I suppose for you then, how did you find it when you first, because obviously you were in the industry as a woman at a very young age. So how did you kind of find stepping into the construction industry all those years ago when it probably was very, very different to how it is now?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of the 90s. That was sort of when I used to walk around site offices and there were page 3 calendars everywhere. It was quite tough being a young woman on site. I didn't have it easy. I had to sort of grow a bit of a Teflon shield because it was there was a lot of abuse. And it'd be blatantly said as you were walking past. But I was really lucky that I had a really, really good manager supporting me, and I have my sort of dad. And one of the first jobs I worked on when I was with Tries was Wimbledon Tennis Club, and I happened to also have an old project manager that my dad had worked with. So I had sort of a group of 3 men really supporting me when I was finding it quite difficult. And I think my dad says now I've got the mouth of a scaffolder. You kind of go along with what you have to do to survive, I suppose, and that may have meant a bit fruity language that I've never really grown out of. I will be good for the podcast, I promise. Yeah, it was tough. There's no denying it. And it was not just sort of verbal abuse. There was physical abuse. I did have an incident. It was a old people's home in Balham, and I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I talk about it in the book, and someone must have told my managing director, because he actually called me into his office and I thought I was in trouble, and he was like, oh, I've heard this happened. And I was like, oh yeah, it did. And he was like, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, because I just didn't want anyone to think I was causing trouble. And he immediately got the scaffolder removed from site, never to work for us again. And that was probably one of the sort of second people who really showed that allyship to me, really supporting me, knowing that they had, very few women in the industry anyway. So they wanted to try and protect the ones that they did have. So, yeah, I think I've been very lucky early in my career. I probably would have left had it not been for those people around me at that time.
And I think that's, from the women that I've spoken to on this podcast, that's quite a common theme is being cautious of speaking out, not wanting to, cause a fuss, or not wanting to kind of, or that kind of common theme of always being talked over or not being believed as well is something that is such a problem still in the industry, really. Even though that incident was a long time ago, it's one of those things that I'm sure these incidents are still happening now, and the industry still has a very long way to go. I mean, I suppose, could you give us a little bit of a an oversight of where the industry's at now in terms of maybe some stats and figures that highlight maybe we do have quite some way to go?
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote the book, I spent 4 years writing it. I did a lot of research. So I spoke to over 1,000 women, and I did a very in-depth survey, which 302 of them filled in. And one of the things that it shocked me, but not shocked me, if you know what I mean, was that 3 in 10 of them said they'd been sexually assaulted at work at some point in their career. And although I asked questions specifically whether it had happened in the last year, 5 years, 10 years, or longer to try and see whether it had changed, and it probably showed it has got better, but the fact that it's still happening, and some of these women that I've spoken to and their stories are in the book, it's happened in the last sort of couple of years, that tells me we've still got a really bad problem. But I think even bigger than that was the bullying and harassment side of it. So 62% of the women said they'd been bullied in the workplace. That is a really big problem, because sexual harassment is bad enough, but bullying is also an issue. And, we sort of think of school bullies, don't we, when we're at school? But, if women are still getting that in the workplace, it doesn't make them feel like they can stay or that they're safe. And I think people talk a lot about psychological safety, don't they, now? And I think we've just got to get it to a point where it is safe for women to be in the industry, because we've got a lot to offer, obviously. And I think the other one that really annoyed me was that 64% of the women that I surveyed found out a male colleague was earning more money than them for doing the same role. And, we talk about the gender pay gap, and I do talk about it a little bit in the book, because I think a lot of people don't fully understand it. It's not just about what you're earning now. When you look at the gender pay gap and you look at how it affects women later on with their pension, for example, there's a really big reduction. It's like it falls off a cliff, particularly for women who have children. So there's a bigger thing than just today's salary. It's actually long term how it affects women. And that's the sort of thing that I think we really need to tackle if we're going to make the industry as inclusive as it could be.
Yeah, and I think really it needs to be accountability at all levels as well. This can't just be "Well, this isn't my problem," kind of sweep it under the carpet thing. I think this needs to be both company-wide accountability from top all the way down to bottom as well, because I think historically these issues have been overlooked. They have been swept under the carpet. They have been pushed to the sides far too often. And it's now that, people are actually having a voice and having a platform to use their voice to promote what's actually going on and promote some of the hard truths that need to be talked about in the industry, that it's become part of the language that is used. But, as you say, there's still a long way to go in the industry, really. I suppose I was quite keen to hear your take on the gender pay gap as well, because you shared some quite interesting things before we spoke about it kind of alienating men as well. So can you explain a little bit about that within the book as well, and that context?
Yeah, I mean, I do talk about the whole flexible working issue, which is something that people assume is just for women, and it isn't. It's not just about women who want to have babies. It can be caring responsibilities, full stop. And I think, I talk about the patriarchy and how it can be very damaging to men. When you look at the UK construction industry, we've got suicide statistic that's 4 times the national average. So that tells me that men aren't faring well in this industry either. Some of that is around, and you do see it on site still now when you're on them, but it was probably worse years ago, is that sort of put up, man up, be tough, don't show your feelings, don't cry, man's man, and all that sort of stuff. But that actually means that we're not leaving the door open for men to share as well. And I think that's sort of, the book went from just being about talking about what the issues are that women have, to also looking at how we can improve things for men as well. And really the culture, full stop, if that improves and we get more diversity, it will improve things for men. And that's proven with loads and loads of research. And I do refer to that in the book. But I think specifically, if we look at the flexible working issue, if you do, and I think we mentioned this just before, some of the jobs in construction are hard on the body. There's no two ways about it, especially for tradespeople. But if you look at something like a crane driver, I interviewed some of those for the book. Women have dropped out of doing that job in some instances because it's so inflexible. They could be working 12, 14-hour days. If a concrete delivery is late, they'll be sat in the cab waiting. And it's known that you get musculoskeletal problems with people that are in those seated positions for long periods of time. So you've not got flexibility and you've got something that's bad for the body. So why don't we split the shift? That means you could have 2 people, both earning good money, both able to still have caring responsibilities. They could, do a lot, agree in those shifts between them if they need to change it at any point. And I think it's just that we don't think about the industry in a different way. We've sort of done things the same way for sort of 30 odd years, and it's like we're not going to change it. But actually, if we did change it, we wouldn't just encourage people in, we'd be able to keep them. And I think that's the big problem with women. We get them in, and you see it on the ONS stats. I've been tracking them since the 90s, and like you see them come in, and then you see it go down again as they leave. And they don't leave sort of when you expect it to be. It's not when they immediately have babies. The RICS statistics showed that they leave around the age of 47. So women will have generally 16 years worth of chartered membership versus men who have 27. And that tells me that, you know, it's not when they've had babies, it's just because it's got quite tough. And I think it's the constant battle and the constant fight. It's exhausting. And I think that's what a lot of the women I've spoken to have said. So we need to make it so that it's not such a battle for women, and it's not such a battle for men where they're having to pretend everything's okay when it isn't, when they're often working in tough conditions. You know, it can be all weathers. You know, they often are the tradespeople, or they'll be project managers put under ridiculous pressure with tight programs. You know, it's pressure, 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 and it's not really a surprise that it blows. You know, and I sort of talk about, you know, just the whole way we treat supply chain. We've got some great tier 1 and tier 2 contractors with really good cultures, but it's a fragmented industry, and most of it's made up of SMEs, and it's them that need the support and the help.
It's a really good point that you said there, because, you know, with the tier 1s and tier 2s, they've got the support, they've got the administration team to be able to put these documentations together and actually be able to implement change. But if you're talking about an SME where someone might consider, oh, this seems like a lot, I know I should be doing this, but that seems like quite a lot of work for me, it just perpetuates that kind of toxic lad work culture where it is a case of, you know, mental health is not really, is kind of a man up and don't talk about your feelings side of things and bottle it all up inside, which, you know, we both know is not the right way of doing things really. And I also think the resistance to change as well is something that is historically always held the construction industry back. It seems to be the construction industry only changes when it's super, super last minute and they kind of have to really. So the way I would put it to SMEs is be that company that takes that brave step, be that company that actually attracts a lot more people to join your business because you're doing things differently and you're the one that's the leader within the market on topics such as this. You know, don't see it as an additional chore, see it as a necessity really to not only attract the right people, but also, you know, the welfare of your current staff that you've got as well. But I'd be interested.
We do have to remember, sorry to cut you off, I think we have to remember some of them don't have the financial facility to be able to do the training and provide what they need. And some people, it will go right down to your self-employed person on the trail. So it's how do we get everybody included in culture change? And for me, I do genuinely feel like the bigger boys and girls have got a massive, massive duty to try and help other people in the industry. And I think that's really what I'm trying to talk about. It's really how do we make it better for everyone? And, you know, you've got considerate contractors and all these wonderful things. Why are we not doing something where, you know, why is a site induction just about health and safety stuff? Why are we not covering psychological safety? You know, talking about the fact that, you know, we want to make sure women and everyone is safe on site. You know, bullying is not okay. Giving people anonymous ways to report. I just feel like there's so much that needs changing, and we can't just say that everybody has to do it themselves. It really is going to take everybody working together.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that on the site actually, you know, like anonymous reporting, and that's mainly with tier 1s that the anonymous reporting is. So, you know, hopefully it will have that kind of trickle down effect really, that, you know, if the top companies are doing that, it will have that natural trickle down effect. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you there on sometimes the SMEs simply don't have the financial backing to be able to implement these changes that they know they should be. I was keen to get your take as well, because I know we spoke about before the podcast, but you know, with men kind of being allies within the industry, and any examples you can give or practical advice you can give to be able to help men in certain scenarios and certain situations where they know historically they probably should have done something, but they just didn't know the right way to go about it or to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about this when I released some stats a little while ago. I mean, the fact of the matter is most of the women that I've spoken to and surveyed, they all know that men are going to make mistakes, and all the men that I've spoken to are all scared of making mistakes. So I think the first thing that really I wanted everyone to think about when they sort of started looking at allyship is that it's not a straight line journey. You aren't going to get it right all the time. We're all human. We all make mistakes, and that's fine as long as the intention is good. And then as part of that, when I was talking to men about what puts them off, it was really, we don't know what to do. And it can be as simple as, and I did have a really lovely LinkedIn post written about it recently. Someone read the book, and he went, and she said, use this as a good example to go and have a conversation with women around me. And that's exactly what I've done, because it can be as simple as, I've read this book and it said all this stuff about women and I just wanted to talk to you about it. And it sort of opens that floodgate to all the women in your life telling you the issues that they have, and it just increases awareness. But then what I also wanted to do was talk about what male allies can do specifically on that journey. So like one of the examples I give is, if you're in a meeting and someone keeps cutting a woman off, just sort of going, hold on there, Phil, can you just stop for a minute and let Faye finish what she's saying? Or if you know that there's a woman there who's got really good expertise, but she's not got a voice, sort of going to everybody, oh, hold on a minute, I think Alice knows all about that stuff. Let's just hear from her, because I'm pretty sure that's her specialism. And it's really just having those moments. It doesn't have to be aggressive, and it's not scary if you have some examples of what to do. And I've sort of provided a few examples just to help people on that journey. And the thing is, once you've done it a few times, it does get easier, but it doesn't get any easier for the person who's being ignored in a meeting or spoken over. And I think that's the big part, is really knowing that allyship is action. It's not sitting there and then going afterwards, oh, that was awful that you kept being interrupted. It's actually something you have to do in the moment. But it's not something that has to be scary. It can be really, really easy and quite lighthearted when you do it.
And I think that's the key word there, is action as well, because, a lot of people would be in that scenario and just not speak up at all, or indeed say afterwards, so, I didn't think that was quite right. But you're right, it is all about action and taking steps. But I suppose in those scenarios, for some men, it might be a case of they just wouldn't know what to say, how to approach it. They might feel a little bit reserved that they should be kind of openly speaking out. But I think, that goes down to work culture, back to work culture and back to the kind of a lad work culture. But I think it's one of them, sometimes there is that kind of fear of going against the grain or speaking out, but there's probably other people in there that are thinking exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's a case of be that person that does speak out, obviously in the right way. As you say, you don't want to be aggressive with that, but obviously in the right way there. And yeah, I do believe that men definitely have a part to play in this and shouldn't see it as changes that need to be made in the industry by somebody else. Again, from the whole top to bottom bit, this isn't just, that's my director's problem, I don't need to worry about that. This is something that can be changed at every level, but as you say, via action first, really. But is there any kind of, I know you mentioned a meeting there, which I thought was quite interesting. Is there any other kind of scenarios where that might be kind of quite common within the industry?
I think meetings is probably one of the big ones that you see, but the other one can be, and I get it even now, when you're like at a networking event. So we talk about, go in your network and, it's great doing it on social media, but when you're actually in person, there can be people that are really, really nervous in those situations. And I mean, I don't even like it, but I've sort of got used to it. But I think some of the best actions I've had from allies when they've been at those sort of events with me is, and I call it now when I do it for other people, a movable safe space. So being with someone and introducing them. So not just chatting to someone because you know them, but actually before you get into all that, going, oh, this is my colleague, Faye. She's a quantum expert. She's been in the industry for 30 years. And this is, Wayne, whatever. Just having those introductions to really help break the ice, because otherwise what you tend to see at networking events is often you'll get a clump of women in the corner because they all sort of gather together because they haven't really been introduced to anyone. And you have to be quite brave. And then you will also see a clump of men in the corner. And I do say that women have to do this for men as well. Men can be equally as uncomfortable. So really it's about just remembering we've got to all look after each other. And if there's someone who's really not good in those situations, just help them and introduce them to people so that it gets easier, because it's like anything. Once you get a bit of practice in it, it does get simpler. So I sort of say allyship, it's practicing those actions. And it's the same. I think women need to be allies to men as well. If you see something being done that's wrong for men, you need to call it out. And I think it's all of our responsibility to do that. And, it can feel uncomfortable, but I always look back and I just think, is it the right thing to do? Yes, it is. Is it right to let someone be spoken to in a derogatory way? No, it isn't. everyone deserves respect. And I think, I have examples from in my career. I had a lovely labourer called Winston, and he used to look after me brilliantly. People would be like, why are you so nice to him? He's just a labourer. And it's like, no,
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
not
yeah.
just a labourer. He is a really lovely human, and you've never taken the time to speak to him or show him the respect he deserves. Just because he's cleaning the toilets and the welfare facilities doesn't mean he's less than me. I was always told we're all equal. And I think if you think like that and stop thinking you're better than someone else, which I think a small percentage of people perhaps do, it does make you just think a little bit differently. Because I just think 99% of people, they aren't bad. They just
Mhm,
don't know what they don't know.
mhm.
For me, it's really just bringing things into people's awareness. And then when they start to notice, like the meeting thing, any man who I've spoken to, they suddenly come back a few weeks later and they go, oh my God, it happens all the time. I didn't realise how much it happens. So it's just learning. We're always learning. And I suppose I just wanted to make it easy, give examples of what people can do, and just show that this is something that we all collectively can do to make the industry better.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that um, I completely agree with you as well, because a lot of the one thing that I would recommend to men is just speak to women about any of the issues that they've faced, because then it is less of a conceptual thing and more
Yeah.
of a realistic thing, because I can guarantee most women will have a specific story or something that has personally happened to them that you would never have known, or maybe they hadn't actually told you before. I mean, I can give one example of a networking event that I went to, where I was sat next to a woman who was the guest speaker. At this networking event, I would not have thought that would be the scenario where something would happen. And the woman, I won't name any names, but put a LinkedIn post about how the networking event was great, but she was sexually harassed at the end of the networking event. I think for me, that really struck a chord with me, because I thought you'd never know what the situation is or when it's going to happen, or say it's definitely going to happen here or definitely not going to happen here. It can happen anywhere. So
Yeah.
I think it's about, first of all, communication at the beginning, and for men to have a good understanding that these things do actually happen, and not to assume that they don't because you haven't heard it. And secondly, just to kind of be vigilant and communicate that and call it out if you see it as well. Because for me, I naively went into that networking event. Didn't even cross my mind that something like that could happen, and it was just a
Yeah.
shock to me afterwards to know that it did happen, and she was quite upset about that, really. So yeah, it's really kind of powerful stuff, really.
Yeah, and I think no one's immune to it. I think it's worse for younger women from the research I've done, and I know it's definitely got a little bit old. As I've got older, it's made it a little bit easier in many respects. But I think when you're young, you're a little bit naive in some cases, so you don't really know how to handle it. And if you haven't
Mm,
got people around you that are calling that stuff out, it makes it really difficult, because you're navigating a tightrope, trying not to upset people, but also trying to keep yourself safe. And it's really difficult to navigate, especially I think for young women and diverse groups when they are in the minority on a site, for example. And I wrote an article recently, and I think, you can have the best leadership, but it's how that flows down through our supply chain and our SMEs, because, you can have a really, really good culture like we've spoken about for a big contractor, but they
mm.
aren't the ones on site doing the work. And you can have 50 different cultures in that workplace. And that's
Yeah,
where we need to sort of work together.
yeah. And I suppose I know the industry's got a hell of a long way to go in this particular topic, but I just wanted to see from your perspective if there were any changes that you've seen since you've kind of got into the industry to now, what the kind of tangible changes have been, and kind of some of the impacts of that, maybe personally or from an industry-wide perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really good things happening out there, and right down from people setting up their own college to make sure that trades are sort of trained properly. So Lee Marley Brickwork, he did that because he was like, I want people to be work ready, and I want them to be how I want them. And he
Mhm,
didn't feel that the training was being done properly, so he set his own thing up. You've
mhm,
got there are contractors now that are offering flexibility, and they aren't demanding that everyone's on site from sort of 7 till 6 like it used to be. You know, but you still do have cultural issues sometimes with that. But the fact that they're offering that is really good. I think there's a lot that's better with offering men flexibility as well. And I do talk about this in the book. If we're ever going to get this to be better, we have to remember it shouldn't just be flexibility for women, it should
mhm.
be for men. And I know Elliot Gray talks about this quite a lot I can't remember what the tagline is now, but he does a lot for, you know, dads and why they should be able to have, you know, 2 weeks paternity leave. It's absolutely nothing, is it? I mean, my brother had it, you know, you get paid a pittance. That's the time where you really want to have that time to be with your baby and bond. Why
Hmm.
should it only be that women get that opportunity? And you know, some of the best companies that do the shared maternity leave, and
Yeah.
when I've spoken to men who've had that, the difference they have felt with the bonding with the child where they've been able to have that time compared to the child where they hadn't, you know, there's a whole realization of all the things that go with it, all the domestic side that they probably didn't think about,
Mhm.
and also just having that better bond with their child. So for me, it's about offering everybody the opportunity. But, you know, the flexibility, like I say, it goes for people who have caring responsibilities. You know, you might have to get home and make sure that, you know, your mum's carer's getting in and, you know, you want to talk to them and make sure everything's okay. You know, we have to remember people have life as well, and they don't necessarily need to be chained to the desk all the time, or, you know that we're working really hard but split shifts again on site work, or making people do work on a day rate. You know, once you've done this much in a day,
Hmm.
they might finish at 2-3 o'clock, but they've done the equivalent of what someone will do between 8 and 5, but they've done it slowly because they've got to eke it out because it's a whole day and they won't get paid otherwise. Whereas if they're paid on a mixed squared rate, they, you know, they probably will be gone a lot quicker. So it's just trying to think differently. And there's all sorts of tech coming in, isn't there? You know, valuations that can be done easier with a camera on your hard hat, and, you know, drone surveys to help see sort of like progress for valuations on jobs. You know, we've got it all. And there's going to be so much more that comes in to support us, but we need to support the people that actually do the work. And I think that's sort of some of the problem.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. And I remember at my old company, I had 2 weeks paternity leave for my first child, and I just was not ready to go back into work. As you say, that kind of whole bonding time just simply wasn't enough. I was not ready after 2 weeks to kind of go back in. I suppose just to kind of round things off, then I know that there's a lot that needs to be done, but I suppose what do you feel as though are the key areas that need some focus, and what do you see as the main kind of solutions or the main things that need to be worked on when it comes to improving the industry?
For me, I think the bullying, harassment, sexual harassment side, and gender pay gap, they're all interlinked, particularly the sort of sexual harassment and bullying. And I think that it has to be called out, and we have to make it safe for people to speak out, because I know in my career I haven't spoken out when things have happened because I'm frightened for my job. I think the one time I did speak out, it was not a nice situation for me, and it was me who was pushed out. So I think, you know, we put women in these positions and then we expect them to just cope with it. It's not right. With the women that answered my survey, and I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but I know it was a massive proportion of them who had reported it weren't taken seriously. They were
Hmm.
told they were being too emotional and nothing was done. It wasn't investigated properly. It needs to be taken seriously. Women do not report bullying and harassment lightly. We will question it for a long time and we will be emotionally broken before we actually report. And sometimes we won't report, we'll just move job.
Hmm.
So we need to make it so that it's safe for the reporting to happen, but more importantly, that it's taken seriously. Because what happens at the moment is it isn't taken seriously. And it's only then that the people who are responsible for it are going to be held to account. And I think that's a big part. I think we have to remember that, you know, 99% of people aren't bad. They just don't know what the situation is. So I think awareness is a big one, and it's part of the reason I wrote the book. I just wanted to bring into people's awareness what's actually going on,
Hmm.
because once you know, you're on the lookout for it, and you will start to pick things up really, really easily, because you'll be like, oh, I remember reading that, and oh, this doesn't seem right. And it's just being brave enough to say something. So that's the thing. I think we all have to be a bit braver, and it can be really, really difficult, but you have to just think, when you were younger, you didn't have a voice because you didn't know what you know now. And now you have a voice. You need to look after the younger generation, because we aren't going to have people to build buildings at this rate if we're not careful.
Well, Faye, it's been a real eye-opener, really, really insightful, and it's been a really, really interesting conversation. I suppose for our listeners who are interested in picking up a copy of the book, I'll include the link below, but where do they go to be able to grab a copy?
Yes, I've got website buildingwomen.co.uk, or you can contact me on LinkedIn. Yeah, and I send them out sort of once a week. Yeah, just be really good to get it out there and just get people reading, and yeah, hopefully make a difference. I should be recording the audio book soon as well, because I know that will help people who maybe don't like reading, because not everybody's a book reader.
Awesome. Well, I'll include the links below. It just says to our listeners, go and click on those links and grab yourself a copy of the book. I'm sure it'll be amazing. But Faye, thank you so much for being a guest on the Building Your Career podcast.
Thank you for having me.